Hi, Praggies. Welcome back to another episode of Pragmatic Optimists. I am Tiara Mack, and I am joined by attorney Rachel Cohen. And we would love to make sure that you remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode. We are going to be talking about the Freedom Flotilla or the Samud Flotilla and media literacy. I want to caution everyone who is watching this to consume media with a constant question inside of your mind. What is this story trying to tell me? What is this story trying to lead me to believe? Who is telling me this story? And what are the conclusions that the mainstream wants me to make about this story? And in particular, we have a group of individuals, about 40 vessels that are on their way to Gaza in order to break the blockade and deliver critical humanitarian aid. We have seen the siege and attack on Gaza City. We now have a population of people moving further south in Gaza. And we have also recently seen the attacks by the Israeli government on these humanitarians who are traversing the Mediterranean in regular behind ships. These are not military grade ships. These are not large vessels that you would traditionally see someone navigating a large body of water. These are everyday. This is Greta Thunberg. This is the Greta Thunberg who has been a climate activist. This is Quentin Quarantino, whose real name I forget at this moment, but he is a Tommy Marcus. Thank you. Tommy is a meme creator who has come to fame during the middle of the COVID crisis, raising millions of dollars in mutual aid. These are regular, everyday people who have answered the call that the people in Gaza have given us. The United Nations, several organizations, some even based in Israel, have now declared that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. So now every country has a legal, and I am not a lawyer, and I'm definitely not an international lawyer. So Rachel, I'll ask you a couple follow-up questions. But because of this new designation of an ongoing genocide, countries now have an obligation to act, I believe. I've been told. So countries have an obligation to act. Israel last night, this is Thursday, August 24th, had bombs on the ships. I believe there were somewhere around 10 explosions, noise explosions, suspected gas explosions as well onto these vessels. And they have tried to paint these humanitarians, again, a meme creator and Greta Thunberg, climate activist for her whole life, as Hamas. What can we kind of put together for the international community, and how can we bridge the gap between what is happening in the international space and what's happening right here in the United States when it comes to media literacy, and how large media can really turn a story in their direction and see us demonize the very people who should be heroes?
That's a lot, and I will do my best. I am not an international lawyer either. And so my friends who are international lawyers who practice that kind of work will often jokingly, but, to cover the real agony, I think, say that international law doesn't really exist. I'm kind of the opinion that the law broadly, I think that we've seen this in the way that the Supreme Court has been deciding things over the course of certainly the last 6 months, but I think even earlier, that the law is all whatever people want it to be. But I do think that it's pretty inarguable that you have obligations to stop a genocide, that you have obligations to not participate in mass punishment, collective punishment, and like mass starvation campaigns. And we've seen that violated over and over and over again by the state of Israel, but also by the vast majority of Western nations, the United States in particular, not just in its ongoing support for the Israeli government, but also in past actions in the Middle East broadly, like the Iraq War. That was a comment I got on TikTok all the time when I was speaking critically of the United States' involvement in Israel-Gaza. This is exactly what the United States did in the war in Iraq. And I was like, right, I agree with that. But I think we're reaching different conclusions there. That was bad also. So I think that the kind of disregard for international law, and when we allow that to slip because our allies are the ones that are violating international law, or we ourselves, our country is violating international law, it's very, very, very slippery slope. And to speak about the mainstream media shaping a narrative, I don't really blame mainstream for this. I blame all of our, the nature of time and capacity for attention. But the United States has been bombing Venezuelan boats. There's like 17 people that have died in attacks on Venezuelan boats by the United States. And I think that I think a lot of people have kind of this sense in the back of their head that things are really destabilized and really bad, and we can't pay attention to everything. But I think that I cannot overstate how uncanny valley, like, nervous it makes me that we are bombing people in our own hemisphere, countries in our own hemisphere that we are not at war with, because there are allegations of drug trafficking. And I think that doesn't mean that you get to bomb ships. There are so many kind of jumps from A to Z that the Trump administration is doing. And when the media does not hold him accountable for going through BCDE, like, that makes people think that what is happening is much more legal than it actually is. You don't get to say, oh, these were drug traffickers. That doesn't mean that you get to bomb them. And I think it's really important that we point those things out and that we really hold people to account. You don't get to say, oh, there's Hamas under this hospital. Like, every single story on this, even if okay, I understand these are governments, you have to report what they're saying, and it's important for people to know what the governments are saying, but that should be followed up every single time and that is a violation of international law still. Important to note that has no bearing on whether or not this is legal. And that's something that I don't think that we're seeing very much. And then we are seeing, I joke, gallows humor of the kind of manufacturing consent contest that we see over and over again as mainstream and corporate media does not report on deaths of Palestinians or attacks on the Samud flotilla. And that's not the case everywhere. There's one more thread I'd like to kind of bring in, and then I'll turn it back over to you. But the kind of success of the boycotts related to Jimmy Kimmel made me think about the entire nation of Italy was engaged in a general strike at the beginning of this week in protest of their government's failure to defend the Italians that are on that flotilla. And so Italy is now sending a Navy vessel to accompany the flotilla as it continues to sail towards Gaza to provide humanitarian aid. And I think that speaks to not only the power of boycotts and strikes, which we've talked about before, and I think is really important for everyone to keep in mind, but also the power of a government that listens to its people. And I think that Americans are so used to being ignored that we can't even really imagine that.
And that is a really sad note to leave on, Rachel. And I think one of the connections that I want to kind of put a fine point on is what we allow to happen in our own country and by our own leaders. We also allow to other countries to perpetrate on their communities. It will only come back to haunt us, and it will only come to our backyards. I completely forgot about the Venezuelan vessel attacks, not just one, but two that have now happened. Even members of Trump's own party, people who are Republican loyalists, have said that happened without due process. For Ted Cruz and Mitch McConnell to come to Jimmy Kimmel's defense, not because they like him and not because they are stands of the show, but because they know that if you attack the free speech of people on the left or people who are to the left of you, when we get back in power, because we will get back in power, I believe that if we organize, we will only then, I will not do this, but their thinking is we will have retribution, or the left will have retribution on them. They want to protect free speech because they know that whoever is in power can then stifle the voices of their opponents. That should not be how our free democracy works. That is our First Amendment free speech, because it's one of the most important ones. But I also want to make sure that we are not skipping over the fact that we have currently made the conditions in our country to normalize injustice. And it can be sometimes overwhelming for people to think, well, there's so much going on in the world and there's nothing that I can do. We can all center justice. That is what you can do every single day, Praggies. You can center justice. What is right is always going to be right, no matter if you are in 2025, 2035, or even 1945. What is right and what is just and what centers humanity will always prioritize the most marginalized, will always be at the priority at keeping people safe, and it will always be at the center of making sure that no one is oppressed by their government. No one is put in a position where their families, their communities, and their loved ones are treated as less than any other category. And when we start to see our role as not questioning what justice is, when we start seeing our role as taking a back seat to upholding the rights of every single person on this planet, when we start taking a back seat to seeing ourselves as agents to hold our government accountable, then we lose the very things that connect us all. We lose the things that make us a community, and we lose our sense of power and agency to push back against a government that tells us that we cannot do something. And that, Praggies, is what I want to leave you on an optimistic note. Italy has shown up and they've shown their government that we will not be silent. They shut down their ports. We can also do that. We saw that Disney, and I want to make sure to be clear again, media literacy is super important. Disney heard the call from people who suspended their accounts because Jimmy Kimmel was taken off air. He is back in some markets, but Sinclair and Nexstar have not brought him back to all markets. I believe there are 40 to 70, someone please fact check me, markets where he is not back in, because Sinclair owns 40 markets and Nexstar owns 30 additional markets. So he is not back everywhere. We now have a country where some people get certain media and other people do not. If we start seeing that as normal, and if we start seeing our role as not questioning everything and questioning what the media is telling us, we will then come to see ourselves as the very victims of the injustice that we are seeing in our own oceans and across the seas. And so I want to make sure that there is hope. There are countries that have been holding their governments accountable. There is real change in our collective action. Community is always going to be stronger than our oppressors as long as we believe, know, and are empowered to step into our voices and to challenge any media, any leaders, and any idea that forces us to put our humanity and put other people's humanity in the back seat. So that is the optimistic note that I would hope to leave you on today. And we will continue to see you all in our comments and in our social media posts, sending love, sending your pragmatic optimism, and continuing to like, subscribe, and share as we continue to make sure that today and every day we are pragmatic, but we are optimistic that the future is going to be better than what we currently have in our moment right now. Thanks, Praggies.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.